Panos is joining us from Crete. Morning, Billy. Morning, Charles. Morning, Scott.
Morning, Roddy. How are you today?
Morning, Roddy.
Very well, thanks. Are you all well?
Very well, thank you. Rolling with the punches.
Not complaining, because there's no point nowadays.
No, that's very true.
Grin and bear it. Christmas
Very
is
true.
coming in some form or other.
So they say.
Yes.
Right. Panos, welcome.
Thank you very much, Roddy. Very nice to be with you.
How is life over in Greece?
Yeah, well, tough like all over the world, but you know, we have to keep up. Situation is well, obviously we're happy that the summer finished without major challenges. Tough winter, very tough winter, much different now than what it used to be in the first lockdown, especially for the hotels. But you know, we're hanging on there.
Are you getting much government support?
We are in the process of getting some support, in a sense that the government is forming a plan according to which they will support hotels through the banks, but they haven't finalized it yet, because I presume that they're looking into what the magnitude of the problem is, because obviously the situation in Greece is totally different due to the fact that the vast majority, about 95% of the hotels, are seasonal operation, which means that they're completely closed. And that creates an extra challenge when it comes to cash flows, when it comes to, you know, sales continuation. We're not able to travel right now. We're not able to support our hotels and resorts at all. And we don't have any cash flow. So the major difference between last April to now is that last April we were sitting on reservations, early booking payments, prepayments from winter, whereas now we have 0 bookings for 2021, several transfers from 2020 to 2021, which we're not sure if they will materialize, and absolutely whatsoever no cash, because nobody's paying and everybody wants a cancellation one day, free cancellation one day prior to arrival, be it an April 21 booking or an August 21. So it's kind of tough.
Well, it'll be interesting to see what Paul Charles has got to say about what the British government's latest position is in relation to international travel and travel, particularly to Greece. I'll make sure to make point. I think Paul may have joined the call already. So, Paul, good morning. Welcome. Just talking to Panos, who's a hotelier in Greece. So I don't know whether you've got anything you can touch on when we get to that point.
I missed the point actually, Roddy, but I'd be delighted to if you could repeat what it was.
No, I was simply saying that Panos is sitting out there with really no visibility of, you know, what's happening in terms of UK, in terms of international travel next year, or the potential for international travel next year. And I was just saying you were joining the call, and you might be able to shed a bit of light in a moment or two when we come to you. Good, because I'm imagining, Panos, that UK represents a pretty substantial element of your business.
Oh, absolutely, positively. Between the UK and Germany, you're talking about the 2 major markets. You're talking about the feeder markets of Greece, especially for resorts. And as I mentioned, 95% of our business is resort operations. Obviously, we're very happy to hear that you are exiting the lockdown, because that means that most probably what we have traditionally known as the period of December 25th to January 7th as a period of the family sitting together in the UK and deciding on the holiday is pretty much right in front of us. And we're happy that we're not sure, of course, if this will produce the bookings that we had in the previous years, let alone the cash flow, but it's definitely some light for the Greek hoteliers.
Well, if it's any comfort at all, Panos, I'm sure there is a raft of pent-up demand in the UK from people who are desperate for a bit of sunshine. So if people are allowed to travel, I suspect you're going to find them arriving in droves with any luck. So, but anyway, Paul, I'm sure will cast a bit more light on that for us.
Yep. Okay.
Good. Okay. Well, we're sort of past the witching hour. People are still joining, but I'll continue to let them in. But I think we should probably crack on. So it gives me great pleasure to welcome back Aggie, who is from HotStats. As I'm sure everybody on the call is aware, HotStats are a major aggregator of hotel performance data across the UK, across Europe, and indeed worldwide. So Aggie and HotStats have been very kind in giving us their time over the months since March to give us periodic updates as to what's happening in the global market and particularly in the UK market. So Aggie, if I may, I'm not sure whose dog that is. It's probably Billy's. I'll just mute Billy. If everybody could perhaps mute themselves, that's not Billy, because we've still got a dog. If everybody could perhaps mute themselves, that would be very helpful. And without further ado, Aggie, if I could hand the baton to you, and very much look forward to an update. Once Aggie has briefed us, we'll turn to Paul Charles, who will give us latest update on Quash Quarantine campaign and the government's latest position in terms of international travel in particular and quarantine measures. But Aggie, over to you in the first instance. Welcome back, and thank you very much for giving us your time.
Thank you, Roddy, and welcome everyone. My name is Aggie. I work for HotStats, and we do a monthly update on the situation in the UK. I'm going to start with some global context and also show a few regions and their performance worldwide. And then obviously I'll talk a little bit on the situation in the UK. This update is end of October 2020, and admittedly it will be quite a short one. I think a lot of information we've already mentioned in previous months. So it's a little bit of information regarding on how the situation has changed in October. Unfortunately, I do not have that much of positive news from the UK, but let's have a look at it. So I'm starting with showing a global performance of GOP percentage change. This is monthly change year-over-year, and you can see here the light blue line was China. So we are comparing the performance of European countries, the key European countries, with China here. That definitely stands out. So we see that China has almost returned to the prior year operational levels, at least in terms of GOP, but in terms of revenue and so on, they're also very close. What we definitely see in China is that the fact that they're opening the hotels a bit leaner, so the labor cost seems to be going down, even though or at least slightly going down in comparison to previous year, even though that profitability almost returned to the same level. If it comes to the countries in Europe, you can see they're all more or less performing at the moment at similar levels. Spain has bounced back from so from September to October, a little bit better performance. Unfortunately for other countries, and among them the UK, the news is not that positive, as we are seeing a slight drop from starting from August, September, and now into October. If it comes to the regions, the regions in the world, on this slide, you will see the performance in October, so October 2020 versus 2019. And then on the right-hand side, we've got Q3. So there is some positive news. As mentioned before, APAC, the GOP is increasing, and now again almost at $30. So definitely we can see every month an increase in GOP in APAC, and this is driven predominantly by performance in China. So you can see October performance was a bit better than even Q3 2020. So there is some positive news there. The Middle East obviously is coming into the season, the tourist season. And quarter three, with quarter three, that region barely broke even. However, now in October, we can see the GOP per available room about $14, and this is a significant increase for that region. Unfortunately, Europe has not done that well in October. Again, quarter three break-even position, and we reported August and September as positive months for Europe. However, unfortunately now this has changed, and Europe is back into negative GOP position. The demand is coming from the leisure segment. This is obviously we know all that. Some uplift, some in the recent month in corporate or conference, predominantly from Asia Pacific, and all the segmentation is leisure segment driven, as we can expect. In Europe, the picture is slightly different in a way that even though the segmentations, again, it's transient or leisure business driven, we can see definitely the downward trend at the moment since August into September and October. In the UK, unfortunately, the picture looks exactly the same. Key European countries on the slide here, comparing the TREFPA with the expense cost and the GOP. You can see that all the key countries in Europe are in a negative position. It's been a really tough year for, for Europe. Italy stands out with a higher TREFPA, but also very high cost base, not being able to pull back the costs as successfully as all the other countries, and left them also in the negative GOP position. Definitely, what we will see in the UK, but also in European countries is that provinces are outperforming key cities, and I'm sure you can expect that as well. That was the case in previous months, and it's still the same. You can see here the confirmation of this for the UK. So England provinces with positive GOP, similarly Scotland, a positive GOP, quite high TREFPA as well for the region. Wales has been affected. I mean, the last part of October, last week or so, was the firebreak lockdown in Wales, and this really left them in a very difficult financial position. In that month, London, negative GOP. This has been a trend for many months now, and definitely it's dragging the overall UK result as well. I've also put together a slide this time to have a look at key cities for the UK. Again, they're all showing negative position, London in particular. In Scotland, Edinburgh and Glasgow reported also negative GOP, but as Scotland's got overall positive GOP per available room. I mean, you can see again that difference between the performance in cities and British provinces. Before, we've also looked at performance by asset type, but I think I was mostly talking about that on a global level. And this time I'm comparing Europe occupancy, or British occupancy in the UK to European result. And on this slide, you will see that the trend line for occupancy in between January and October 2020. Definitely extended stay type of property is outperforming other types, and that's for Europe from occupancy point of view. And in the UK, the situation looks slightly differently, where we can see that in the second quarter of 2020, actually it was select service properties performing better from occupancy point of view, and only after then that performance was taken over by the extended stay asset type. In terms of profitability, again in Europe, definitely extended stay properties, they stand out. Any other asset classes have had really tough time, with about 4 months below the GOP level. Now, afterwards you can see a little bit of bounce back, July, August, September, and unfortunately now the situation for them is becoming difficult. And in the UK, we've got select service properties actually that weather the situation much better and managed to managed to keep the profit on a bit higher level. With extended stay type below the GOP level only for about 2-3 months. However, full service hotels really took quite a big hit over the period of time during the crisis between March or July under the GOP per available room below zero. So that's been a very difficult period. And as you can see now in October, we're unfortunately back in a very similar position. For F&B, for the full service properties, definitely F&B revenue impacted the performance significantly. However, in that respect, there is some positive news for the hotels. We were trying to find as much as possible positive news for the hospitality industry. What we can see here is that the F&B revenue on a per occupied room basis has been increasing. I presented that data already in September and previous months as well, where we saw an increase in Europe. So for example, here on the right-hand side, 20% increase in room service, 10% increase in restaurant. That's on a per occupied room basis. And in the UK, that increase is even higher. For the room service in October, it was 40% year-on-year increase, and then 15% increase for restaurants, and even slight increase for the bar revenue. As we can see here now, the guests either prefer or choose to stay in hotels for the dining experience, and the data proves that. So on the revenue side, the situation is quite dire, and it has been for months. However, when it comes to costs, we've been monitoring as well the situation, because we saw at the beginning of the crisis a spike in operation supplies, and hoteliers were challenged to new rules and obviously their impact on the cost levels. And the trend is very similar in Europe and it is in the UK. And last time I showed the same graph for China, and it was exactly the same, where at the beginning of the crisis, the countries or regions experienced spike in operating supplies on a per occupied room basis. However, at the moment, this seems to have normalized, and we are back to the same levels, or very similar levels to where we were before the crisis. And the last point is the break even. We've been monitoring this in the last few months, throughout the crisis, where we were showing before the crisis that hotel in the UK on average break even at 40% or around 40% occupancy. Throughout the crisis, that break even point has moved and dropped significantly, 20% in July, as you can see. And now there is slight increase. We were suspecting, obviously, that it will happen, that some costs will be returning to the properties. They might in the future as well. Furlough and any government support that we're having will be decreasing as well. Therefore, that break-even point will move. So it's not stagnant, that it will move every month, and most likely will be increasing every month, exactly as we've been showing here on the graph. And really, that's it from me today. Please let me know if you've got any questions.
Aggie, thank you very much. I was just going to say, could you leave that, just put that summary slide back up at the end there, just for a moment?
Yeah, sure.
That one.
Yeah, so in summary, as I mentioned, we've got some trends from China and data from China saying that the hotels opening in the future might be leaner hotels, particularly from labor point of view. But provinces are all outperforming the key cities. We've noticed that extended stay properties and select service in the UK have performed better than the full service throughout the crisis, definitely from profitability point of view. That the initial spike that we experienced in operating costs has now returned to norm, has normalized, and obviously we've got changes in the break-even point. It doesn't stay the same every month, but it will most likely ramp up in the future months.
Thanks very much, Aggie. I mean, one assumes a lot of the vacillation in operating costs is because of the costs incurred by hotel owners and operators having to open and close and change their operating formats and protocols and so forth, which not only is giving people a complete nightmare, but must be incurring significant cost as well. Good, thank you for that. David Bailey from HotStats has joined the call. David, thank you very much for joining us. I know you were overrunning on a previous call, so you will have missed most of Aggie's presentation, but I'm assuming you're probably pretty au fait with the statistics that are coming out. I suppose the most noticeable, well, my take out, most noticeable sort of shift is that performance has deteriorated in October, where it had been improving. I dare say there are a variety of reasons which have led to this, but I don't know whether you'd like to just make a comment on why performance has dipped and what you perhaps anticipate happening up towards the end of the year.
It's a good question, Roddy. Not an easy one to answer. To be fair, not knowing exactly that everything at Aggie's covered. I think the numbers are not going to improve for the rest of 2020. Thank goodness we're at the 1st of December today, and we're that bit closer to writing off what will be a year that we'd all rather forget. I think something that I was talking to Aggie about the other day, which I think is really interesting from the data, when we've looked at past downturns and the GFC in particular. There's a time lag to profit recovery of about 1.5 times relative to recovery in RevPAR. So it takes longer historically, it's taken longer for profit to return than it has RevPAR, as I say, by a factor of 1.5 times. The early data from Asia and from China is suggesting that is compressed because of some of the measures that have been put in place with cost reductions that will be retained and a kind of rebasing of operations. So what I'm hoping, looking forward, rather than trying to sort of second guess exactly what's going to happen for the rest of this month, I think we could see quite a rapid bounce back to profit. I think the first 6 months of next year are going to be particularly tough because we know that profit as a quantum is still going to be subdued. Even though we're going to be celebrating significant gains in the top line, it is going to take time for that to work through to the net operating income in particular. So I see that as the critical phase. But beyond that, I'm actually feeling quite optimistic. And I mean, I think it was terrific to open the newspaper today and to see, and provided it's not fake news, and I'm sure there'll be conspiracy theorists out there, but to see the Prime Minister holding a vial of the vaccine, I think it's a pretty powerful image. And we've been talking about the vaccine, but now, if it is the vaccine, we have it within our grasp. So the quicker that we can get that out and get the industry moving again, the better. So yeah, I'm looking forward to writing off 2020 and getting stuck into 2021, frankly, Roddy.
And David, a lot of the people on the call are either in the independent hotel sector or in private hotel businesses. Can you, I mean, you're obviously extremely well connected and you talk to an awful lot of people in all sorts of different arenas. What is the sentiment in the corporate hotel world, if we're looking at the big brands? What's their take of life at the moment?
Oh, goodness me. Well, that's another great question. I think what this whole crisis has done, it's forcing a more collegiate and collaborative relationship between all the stakeholders, because that's the only way we're really going to get through it. Now, I'm not in any way diminishing. There will be lots of tensions and there will be issues out there for sure in the nature of the contract between owner, between operator, and between brand. But I think the brands have had to, everyone has had to accelerate change. The brands have had to, put forward cost reduction measures, look at their business, think about their pipelines and how they're going to operate. And I think they've probably done all the critical things to stabilize their businesses, and none of the big majors, I would say, are at sort of particular risk because of the measures they've taken and because of the prospects looking forward. So again, taking kind of longer term view, I think we will end up in a better place with a better appreciation of the roles of the different entities that are in the capital stack and how those parties interact and how best to perform. So whether that's a long way of saying that the mood in the camp, I think it is pretty sanguine. I think it is. I think they've weathered the most critical element of the storm, and we are now, I think, looking and planning into what life will be like next year. But I do come back to that point, you know, the first half is still going to be very tough next year, but it's going to be tough in the context of an improving trajectory. I think once we start getting the vaccine rolled out, and it's critical how that happens, both in its timing and further relaxation. So I don't know if that fully answered the question, but
No, that's very, very helpful, David. I mean, you know, there are a huge number of very large hotels out there sitting in city centres with acres of event space and ballrooms and goodness knows what. I mean, what is the view of the people that own those properties? I mean, do they see a full recovery in 2, 3, 4 years' time, or do you think that they will radically change the actual, you know, what goes on within in those buildings?
Well, I think they, you know, right now they have to evaluate all ways to drive revenue, and I think it was a great, was it last week? But I lose sense of time and space. But you know, Sally Beck and her initiative at the Royal Lancaster, and how they can use tech to sort of compensate for some of that space. So I think we'll see innovation and usage. It's what's going to be critical to that is the confidence that people have to travel, and the confidence that big business has to send, you know, employees en masse into these environments. I mean, I think it will come back, but then, you know, we know there's going to be a flight to quality. There'll probably be a flight to certain types of locations, so it won't affect everybody equally. That is going to be the slower, probably the more anxious element to come back, and particularly for those businesses that can't sort of have a compensation with exposure to the leisure market, which we have more confidence about. So I think those big urban big boxes, you know, that is a challenge.
Do you see, as a matter of interest, do you see any number of them closing, or do you think they'll just tough it out and wait for the market to return?
I mean, closure, I mean, is the act of last resort. You know, we know from your commenting about, you know, sort of closing hotels and reopening them, and the implications of that. You know, no one wants to own a closed hotel and everything that goes with it. So I think that would be an extreme case. If you're looking at a market like London, you know, if we get confidence and international travel starts to return, then these hotels that maybe have big event space, they're also fantastic venues to host visitors to London, not necessarily linked to that event space. So to those hotels, I think they wouldn't be looking to close. They have to assess what is economically prudent to do with the number of rooms that they're operating and bringing online. So I would expect closure to be limited, I think, certainly from a long-term basis.
Okay, good. Well, that's a positive. So final question for now, David. If you get out your crystal ball, you've already said you're reasonably optimistic about, you know, the outlook, and images of our Prime Minister clutching a vial of the vaccine. Well, I mean, and you've also said that, you know, first 6 months next year is you think it's going to be tough. But what do you think that 2021 has in store for us?
Well, I mean, it is good. I mean, when you look at the PwC projections, what was it, 55% average occupancy for the UK as a whole? I think nearly 60% in the provinces, just over 50% in London. I mean, the metrics are challenging to process, and we're going to celebrate levels of performance that we would have previously considered derisory. So I think there has to be a sense of embracing the positive things that will happen, and the businesses keeping on the front foot and doing all the great things that we can do in hospitality. But there is a real challenge, I think, through the P&L still, as that translates through to profit. And that's where we need, you know, forbearance from the banks, we need, you know, supportive owners, and we need support from the brands and pragmatism. So I'm not in any way trying to dial down just how challenging a year it will be, but it will be a year of recovery. I was listening to Andrew Sangster on his podcast this morning, which I think is always a good listen. But, you know, I think a really important thing is, whatever recovery we have, I think the recovery will be quite like any other recovery we have had. We're looking at, you know, the GFC. We've had different, you know, we've had a very acute downturn, I'm not suggesting it's going to be an immediate bounce back, not at all, but whatever the recovery is, I think will have its own pattern and its own signature. And I think, you know, if momentum builds, it could be, I think, really quite rapid. Not for everybody. I think that's the real challenge. It's not going to treat all hotels equally. It's not going to treat all markets equally, or hotels within those markets. But at a general level, I think we could see quite a rapid tick up. There's a lot of pent up demand out there, provided the vaccines work and there's confidence there for people to travel and for businesses to get moving. I think we could have hopefully some what will feel like quite pleasant surprises, although they might be difficult to comprehend and appreciate at this point.
And sorry, having said that was the last question. One final question. A lot of these people on this call, David, as you well know, are in the independent hotel sector, and I guess are lucky in that they perhaps fall into that area of the market which, you know, whilst it's been devastated, has perhaps not been quite as devastated as the as city centre operators. What would your advice be to these provincial hotels going into 2021 in terms of how they can best prepare themselves for what might lie ahead?
Wow. Well, I think the real challenge for independents and single assets is that, you know, your options are limited, say relative to if someone owns a portfolio, you can do things to change the shape of the portfolio. You can perhaps trade some assets to help right size loans. In a single asset, it's more challenging. You have more limited options. You may well be heavily equity invested and your equity is illiquid. So, you know, I think the challenge is more acute. I think where you have advantage is through speed of decision making and being able to do things that are right for your business. I think the challenges are to reach your markets. Those that are in leisure locations that have done particularly well, then, you know, that's a good position to be going into next year. It's a challenge for the independents, but I think forums like this, where you can share, you know, best practice and insights are helpful. But I think you've just got to, you know, engage with your bankers fully, because I think what's really critical is having a robust business plan as we come out of this. And what we will have as we come out of it, there will be greater clarity as to what is likely to happen to performance. There'll be greater certainty. So it's all about, you know, it's probably repeating stuff that's been said a lot already, but it is communicate like anything, I think, with your banks as to what you're planning, what you're doing with your teams. I think, was it Robin Hudson the other week was saying, what is it? It's people, it's product, and profit will follow, and focusing on what are considered real core basics. But I think independents can do that in their own way, and to do it rapidly. But I appreciate it is tough, but they are a massive, important part of our experience, you know, hospitality experience here in the UK.
David, thank you very much indeed. You touched on the importance of these sort of sessions and having forums or fora where people can compare notes and share experiences. Just before the call started, Richard Fannon, who's on the call, who has a hotel in Norwich, was just asking if people on the call could perhaps provide him with what their take is on the latest regulations with regard to households, because he's picked up that he thinks there's been a change in terms of bubbles and what a bubble now means, particularly if there is a dependent. His understanding is that you can have, in addition to a bubble, household bubble, you can also have one dependent and carers. Could anybody who thinks they've got any clarity around that perhaps drop a comment into the chat box if you think you know what the latest regulations or latest restrictions are, and we can perhaps share those in a moment. So thank you very much, David. Thank you very much, Aggie. Very helpful and insightful as ever. Statistics are one thing, but it's always very helpful to get a sort of human take on what people are thinking and where we think the industry is heading. So in that vein, it gives me great pleasure to welcome back again Paul Charles. Paul has joined us as a guest on a number of occasions. Paul has a business called the PC Agency, which is one of the leading PR companies in the travel sector. with a very blue chip client list, an international client list, I should say, but also very relevantly to this call, he has been heading up the Quash quarantine campaign, lobbying government hard in terms of getting some sense around quarantine periods and restrictions on international travel, and indeed looking at more positively opening up international travel. Paul, there are one or two people from overseas on the call today who I know would be interested to hear what your views are in terms of opportunities going into 2021. But can I just hand you the baton and ask you perhaps to give us a bit of an overview as to where you think we're at?
Yes, thank you, Roddy. Good morning, everyone. Always a pleasure to be on this group. Very, very good quality discussion. So thank you also to David and Aggie. Where are we at? Well, first of all, the good news is starting to flow through. And I think I'd echo what David was saying in terms of the next 3 or 4 months. Sorry, my doorbell's going off. Someone delivering from Amazon, no doubt. The next 3 or 4 months are going to be much tougher, but there is a lot of light at the end of the tunnel. First of all, really good news, talking to a lot of...
Paul, do you want to answer your doorbell? We won't be offended if you want to just go and see if it's something important.
If you give me 30 seconds, that would be very helpful. Yes, please. Thank you.
Good. No, there's nothing worse than having somebody at your door when you're trying to concentrate on something else. It's probably better to try and sort it out. Do drop any thoughts into the chat box that you have regarding bubbles and households, because I noticed nobody has thus far, which probably means nobody's got a clue. But if you do have any idea, please do pop a comment into the chat box. David, just while we're waiting for Paul to return, what do you think is likely to happen regarding Christmas? I mean, do you think we're going to be given sort of free rein to party away for 5 days?
I'm saved by the Amazon delivery. I don't know. I think it's sort of sticking in my mind. Something I read in the paper today was when you think of the position of retail, certain elements of retail being able to operate for 24 hours potentially up until Christmas, and yet the restrictions on hospitality, which just seems utterly unfair. And I think there's a genuine beef that we can have as a sector. But I'm sure it's going to be difficult to stop people partying and celebrating Christmas in the way that they want to, frankly. Never mind interpreting all the various rules. But I think there'll be a lot of relief, as I say, just closing the book on 2020 and starting afresh, whatever the challenges that are, and material though they are. Let's get stuck into a new year and a new dawn, I hope.
Absolutely. Good. Well, Paul, the penalty for going to answer your door is you've got to tell us who it was. Now, back over to you.
Well, the good news is, from a hospitality point of view, it should be a fresh pasta maker. That's what's been delivered. So fingers crossed it was in the box. Yeah, the good news, as I was saying, is that from Monday next week, possibly Tuesday, doctors are expecting and have been told to start vaccinating. So the good news is the vaccinations are expected to start next week for NHS workers, who will get the priority, and then care homes. So we're into the phase now where the vaccine is highly imminent. It will get sign off. The regulators have been across the development phases, which is why it will get quick sign off. And there's a lot of optimism among doctors and senior nursing officials about getting going. So that is good news and sticks very much to the government's timetable. So once that starts, that will take some time, obviously, to percolate through the various categories, and you're into a rolling phase, which is going to take roughly 6 months to vaccinate the vast majority of people in the UK. So you're looking at a December to May timeframe for vaccination. Now, against that backdrop, what you'll also see during December is the test to release scheme start on the 15th of December. And this is the next major milestone, certainly in England, Scotland have said at the moment they're not going to introduce it. Wales have deferred comment, as of Northern Ireland at the moment, so we're waiting to hear. But certainly in England, the test to release scheme starts on the 15th of December. And what that means is that at last, quarantine reduces from 14 days to 5 days if you're coming from a high risk area. So let's take Cyprus as an example, because I know Panos is on the call. Then if you're traveling to Cyprus, which is currently a high risk area as far as the UK government's concerned, then when you return from Cyprus, or if you're a Cypriot resident coming into the UK, you would have to quarantine for 5 days. And before you travel to the UK, you have to book a test appointment for the 5th day after you have returned to the UK. So on day 5, after you re-enter the UK, you will take a test. The government has not set out the criteria for that. I'll come back to that in a second. But you theoretically will take a test on the 5th day, and you'll get the results back potentially within an hour in some cases. And you, if you're negative, will be released from quarantine on day 5. So it's progress in terms of 14 days coming down to 5. But obviously for some people, and I'm aware of various surveys coming out in the next few days, it's still very much a hurdle to have a 5-day quarantine. So it's not ideal, but it's progress. So that's the next stage during December that we're going to see on the 15th of December. And the good news is actually for anyone who is returning in the next few days before the 15th of December, who would normally do 14 days quarantine, they will be able to book a test very soon for the 15th onwards to reduce that 14-day quarantine. So if you're coming back to the UK on the 10th of December, for example, you could book it in for the 15th and only have to do effectively 5 days quarantine. So that's certainly work that has taken a long time to get to, and the government have certainly been waiting for the test quality to improve before they roll out that scheme. And we will be seeing more details about it. What we're waiting for is this criteria. So the government is, from a testing point of view, working with test providers like Collinson on how you would get a test. Now you will have the option on that day 5 to go to a test centre, and it will be private facilities, not NHS, and you will pay for the tests yourself. They won't be given by the NHS free of charge. You'll pay for your private test either at a test centre or at home. And so we're waiting for the exact detail on the criteria for those tests. We think PCR tests will definitely be allowed. It's possible saliva tests, which are becoming more common now, will be allowed, but we're waiting to see the exact nature of that criteria. So from the 15th of December, we'll be in a phase of 5-day quarantine, not 14. Obviously, if anybody doesn't want to take a test or can't afford a test, which can be up to £200 per person, then they can opt for the 14-day quarantine and carry on doing 14 days without any cost. But I think the vast majority of people going away or returning from a high-risk area or coming in as citizens of a high-risk area will opt for the 5 days. So that's encouraging. What we're going to see, though, in January, I think, is even more progress. So the Global Travel Task Force has been set up by both Matt Hancock and Grant Shapps, the Transport Secretary and the Health Secretary. And what that task force is doing, and it's comprised of Public Health England officials, officials from the Foreign Office, mostly government bodies, but it is taking soundings from the likes of Visit Britain, the World Travel and Tourism Council, various airports, among others. What that task force is going to do in January is start to roll out 3 things. First of all, pre-departure testing trials. So they're basically going to say, we want to test a route, for example, London, New York, Heathrow, JFK. We want to see if we can do testing on departure, either at the airport or 3 days before and ask you to quarantine and then go straight to the airport, knowing you should be free of COVID. Then get on the plane, have a bubble on the way to New York effectively, because everybody will have been through some form of testing, and then arrive in New York and have another test, and then you're free and don't have to quarantine. So we're going to see certain routes trialed. And I think New York will be one of them. Already airlines are starting their own initiatives to trial various things. And secondly, we may see Singapore potentially trialed as a bubble. We're just waiting to see where they may be. So we're going to see that, and the task force have said very clearly in their one of their 14 recommendations, they will develop a pre-departure testing proposal. We're going to see some hope for business travel. The government really want to see no quarantine introduced for business travelers. They finally realize, and it's remarkable how often you have to tell them these things, but they finally realize that business travelers often only go for a day or two and therefore can't afford to quarantine in terms of time. So they're looking at allowing business travelers to travel on business as long as they don't socialize. Now, arguably it removes the perk of going on a business trip, that you won't be able to go for a drink with a contact or a supplier when you arrive in, say, Frankfurt. But they're saying, if you want to travel for business, we're prepared to let you do it if you don't go for a drink or eat out afterwards, after your meetings. So for some business travelers, that will be progress. And that would be good news for the business community, which is, from a business travel point of view, in the worst state possible. And then the third thing is daily testing. So they're going to start in January a scheme, and again, it'll be a pilot. All these things are fairly cautious steps forward, but you're going to see a daily testing pilot. And this will mean that you would be tested for 7 days as an individual. You'd agree to the testing. You wouldn't have to quarantine at all coming back from a high-risk country. So if we take Cyprus again as an example, I'd go on holiday to Cyprus, I'd come back from a fantastic hotel like the Amira in Paphos, I would come back to the UK and I would simply take a swab or saliva test or a lateral flow test, which is most likely, each day for 7 days, and I could go about my normal business. And that is against the backdrop of the moonshot strategy, which the government have set out already for daily testing across the UK. And they've started that trial in Liverpool. It's been pretty successful so far. That is involving lateral flow tests, which I'll say more about in a moment. And then that's the third phase, the daily testing. So all of these are phases to inject progress and hope into various parts of the travel ecosphere, if you like, at the same time as getting more of the population vaccinated, which I've already talked about. So those are the elements we're going to see in the next few weeks, and they are moving faster than ever. They didn't move fast at all, the government, between July and October. It was very, very slow, but suddenly the pace has picked up, and it's picked up because they are now confident about the vaccines and the testing technology. And it's only those that have made these next phases possible. The lateral flow tests, very quickly, you're going to be seeing a lot more of these. The lateral flow tests are much cheaper. They are more like 40 to 50 euros each, rather than 120 pounds. They are fast, they're highly accurate, and they are quick results, quick to turn around within an hour, sometimes 30 minutes. And that's because they're not being sent off to a lab for testing. The results come back straight away in a portable test facility. So it's lateral flow that is the answer, really, to getting people moving again and getting all of us back to some form of normality.
Without being too crude about it, which orifice do you have to deal with if you're taking a lateral flow test? Lateral
flow still involves throat and nose. So yeah, you still have to have those. But the good news is that they're able also to do saliva. And that is the ultimate, because then you spit into a cup or a tube, and then they can immediately analyze it. And actually, that's what airports like Finland, Helsinki Airport and Dubai Airport are already doing. They're asking some passengers to spit into a cup, and then that cup is taken away to be sniffed by dogs and sniffer dogs that they're using. And these dog tests are highly effective, working very, very well where they're sniffing for coronavirus. So some airports are a little more advanced than our own in the UK.
Thank you very much, Paul. Really, well, interesting, but also encouraging. So if you look at the bigger picture for 2021, and again, I don't want to just focus on Panos, but he's sitting over there and wondering about the UK market and whether we are likely to be able to travel in any numbers next year. Well, I mean, what are the airlines thinking? What's your thinking?
The pent-up demand is there, without a doubt. When you talk to the Skyscanners of this world, you talk to the hotels.coms of these world, Expedias, they're all seeing the search volumes go up quite dramatically. So the demand is there to travel. The confusion and confidence is not, the confusion's high and the confidence is low though. And so government's got to re-inspire confidence. In fact, the UK government will be running a series of marketing campaigns over the next 3 months to reignite confidence in travel. Secondly, for 2021, you're going to see a very, very strong May onwards. So January to April is going to be very weak. People will be in various stages of lockdowns, vaccines will be rolled out, but their efficacy will not be proven at that point. So the January to April period is going to be weak and very low revenues coming in, even half term. I wouldn't bank on too much happening at February half term at all. Maybe by Easter there will be a lot more confidence, but January to April is going to be a tough period. So for the early start of the season for hotels at home and abroad, I think it's going to be still a very, very difficult period. However, the confidence will be building from sort of February onwards as we start to head to spring, as more vaccines are introduced. And that will lead to bookings for the May period onwards to be very, very strong. So we know from all the surveys, everything that people are saying, that they intend to travel, the bookings for flights are stronger, the capacity is going up for the summer period from a current 28 to 30%, back up to around 70 to 80% for the summer. And it may actually increase further. But yeah, that's the period. It will be a very strong 2021 from May onwards. But it's before that that's about survival and about protecting cash and making sure that your business is fit for purpose to rebound strongly when it does rebound. And it will rebound.
A bit of sort of personal interest here. I mean, there's been quite a lot in the press about ski resorts. I understand the Italians, the French are not allowing their resorts to open, but the Swiss and the Austrians, I think, are allowing their resorts to open. Is that the case? And are people likely to be able to go skiing in the spring?
It will be a late season for the ski season. There's a lot more optimism around certainly March. I think it's going to be difficult for half term and up to the end of February. I don't see ski resorts, most of them being open. I honestly think the festive period this year is going to lead to a massive spike in infections, and that will take the whole of January and most of February to bring down. So whether you agree with the festive opening or not, it's going to be a messy period in January and February for infections. They will rise dramatically. And January and February is much worse in any normal year anyway, due to infections going around and colds. So the ski resorts won't see much at all before the end of February. There won't be the confidence for most of them to open. You will see a late season, I think, in March as the spring starts, but it's going to be a very short season and a very late season.
Thank you, Paul. So I probably won't book my holiday for January, in which case, Tanya Lister no, okay. Tanya Lister from Karlsruhe Hotel has asked, Paul, what tests do you see being most relevant for the hospitality industry in terms of enabling guests to come back to hotels, proving that they're virus free? I mean, is there any discussion about this?
No, there isn't. And obviously from a hotel's perspective, they want those tests to be as least cost as possible. But the saliva tests, I think, are going to be the ones that will make a real difference because they're less invasive, less intrusive, and they are much easier to administer, obviously, and more of the population will be comfortable taking them. Can you imagine if you're into a daily testing regime from January, certainly in tier 3 areas of the UK, of England, tier 3 areas, maybe tier 4 areas of Scotland, and the worst hit areas of Wales. Can you imagine doing daily testing if you're having to do swabs and up the nose and down the throat every day? For a lot of people, it's not pleasant. They don't want to do it. So the technology is now working on the saliva tests being much more accurate, and they're imminent. So I think saliva tests would be the answer for hotels. They're much cheaper, they're quicker, they're faster. The really frustrating thing is, as we all know, there are barely any cases of coronavirus coming out of hotels. This is the fundamental issue that we've got, where government ministers are lumping together the whole of the hospitality sector, even though there are nuances, and they love that word, nuance. So why aren't they applying it to the hospitality sector? And secondly, the hospitality sector has done an amazing job of showing government that so much has been invested, but government's not listening, and it just seems to lump the whole of the sector in together. So I think we're going to see hotels providing tests where possible, but it's only we're only going to see a return to near normal capacity or 80% occupancy when the vaccine has been properly rolled out to the vast majority of the country. So if you're looking at May before that has happened, then occupancy for a hotel is not going to return to anything like 90%, 80% before May.
There's an interesting comment from Panos here, who said that in Greece, where's his comment? He says, where is it? Greece are going to limit the pricing that private clinics can charge for coronavirus tests. The country's government said on Friday, the price limits would be 40 euros for PCR testing and 10 euros for rapid antigen tests. I mean, one assumes all this testing we've been talking about, pre-departure testing and the testing at the other end and the 7-day testing, this will all have to be paid for, one assumes, by the individual.
Yes, certainly in the UK, the government's made it very clear that it can't be NHS paying for these tests. There can't be any strain on resources. So it would be paid for by the individual. I advise tour operators that they should be putting it into the package price. And I would say the same potentially to hotels. Any hotels thinking of testing, I would try and include that £40, €40 cost as the price comes down, maybe in with a package that you're doing. So if you have a 3-night package, say, to stay at the hotel, then include a test if you need to, if you're having to go down that route, and include that price within the package, because consumers are quite happy to pay it if they know a test is included and the price masks that £40 on its own. Yeah, you've got to pay. It's got to be a private test. And I think we will, as I say, see the price has come down quite dramatically in the UK from the average £150 to £180 of a test currently to something much more in the region of £40 to £80. And that could be one of the criteria the government here is looking at. We're waiting to see that criteria. I have to say, foreign governments have been much more advanced than the UK government in terms of pricing low, but that's because they're subsidising heavily on those test costs, whereas the UK government is not prepared to subsidise private tests.
There's a question here, Paul, from Jill Chalmers, who I know you know very well from Glen App, one of your many clients, I believe. But Jill's asking, she says, we've spoken a lot about weddings recently. Is there any news on the street about numbers for weddings, larger gatherings from after Easter next year?
The only word on the street is that the tests, the trials which are about to take place in sports venues and football stadiums, particularly for 2,000 or 4,000 people, are the trial that everyone's looking at to see how successful they are. Because if they're successful, then the government is going to move much more to allowing certainly outdoor weddings to take place in greater number, greater volume. from sort of, again, April, May next year. So I think the wedding sector is going to continue to be capped in terms of numbers for the rest of the winter period. I think it's going to be tough, but the numbers will rise as the weather gets better and they're forced outside. And the government will say, well, if you're holding it outside, we're prepared to let more people go. But if you're holding it inside, we're going to cap the numbers. So the trials that are taking place at various sporting venues are going to be the key here to build confidence. And that's what the government strategy is all about. Build confidence in a number of areas, including the vaccine program, before the spring. And then by then, things will be starting to return to normal.
Thank you very much, Paul. There's rather a nice comment here to sort of round up our session from Charles Prue, who says, I'm seeing my mum on Thursday. It's her 105th birthday at her care home. And I have to have one of these fast COVID tests, which takes 15 to 20 minutes to get the result before I can see her. And of course, I will be in full PPE, etc., and 2 meters from her. But Charles, I think we all send your mother huge congratulations on the occasion of her 105th birthday. I don't know too many other people who managed to achieve that. I hope she gets at least 5 telegrams from the Queen, one for each year over 100.
Thank you, Roddy.
So
it's worth saying, Roddy,
no,
that the first of all, happy birthday to Mrs. Charles Prue, as it were. But equally, just one positive thing is that how resilient that generation has been, of course, that was around during the Second World War. They were resilient because they were faced with unprecedented circumstances. And I think it's important to say the generation of sort of 5 to 20-year-olds growing up at the moment who are going through this pandemic will be a resilient generation for the future. And that bodes well, I think, for 50, 60, 70 years' time.
Well, that's a very nice positive note to end on. Just to let everybody know, next week, our guests are Vicky Miller, Head of Marketing for Visit Scotland, and the lovely, wonderful Cyrus Todiwala, who is going to join us to tell us a little bit about life in the restaurant sector at the moment, which I think we probably know a bit about anyway. If any of you have not heard Cyrus, he's hugely entertaining. And I'm sure he will have some bright notes in what he has to say as well. So next week, Vicky Miller, Cyrus Todiwala, thank you particularly to Aggie. Aggie, thank you very much indeed for your time today. Thank you very much to David Bailey for your commentary, and Paul, a huge thank you to you. Richard and Norfolk, I'm sorry nobody's come through with any answers on what the latest regulations are on bubbles, so I can assume nobody's got a clue. And thank you all to everybody for your questions, your comments, and your views. It's been another fascinating session. Thanks particularly to Paul, Aggie, and David. Have a great week. Stay safe. If you've got any chums you'd like to introduce, you know where I am. Just ping me an email. There is a recording which we will be circulating, which you're welcome to send on to anybody else. And very much look forward to seeing you next Tuesday, same place, same time. And stay out of the way of the dreaded virus in the meantime. Thank you very much to you all.
Thanks, Roddy.
Thank you.
Thanks, Roddy.
Great pleasure. Take care. Good luck, Panos.